welcome to the No Montana Lecture Series for October 3rd. I'm going to let you know about what's happening next week for the No Montana Lecture Series. On October 10th at 7 o'clock, Mary Gleim, Murderous Madam of Front Street, will be presented by Kim Kaufman. Mary Gleim ruled the bad lines of Missoula, which was Front Street, from the late 1880s to the early 1900s. She amassed a real estate, money, and a dubious reputation that lasts even today. The story is filled with myths, rumors, and lies. Please join us next week at 7 o'clock. Okay. Tonight, I put a list, a piece of paper back there. If you'd like to be notified for any No Montana lectures that we have, if you want to sign your name into your email, we'll send you an email when we have the next series, if you like this kind of historical program. Tonight we have Through a Glass Brightly, and we just heard the announcement, so I won't read that again. Our speakers are Dick Gibson and Irene Scheidecker. Dick Gibson grew up in Michigan and Indiana and is now a consulting geologist for international oil exploration, and he lives in Butte. He is active with the Butte Citizens for Preservation and Revitalization and served as a tour guide for Old Butte historical adventures, as well as for Smithsonian journeys around the world. He's also a member of the Butte Restoration Alliance and serves on the Butte Silver Bow Historic Preservation Committee. Irene is a Butte native and is a member of the Board of Directors of the Butte CPR, She has studied Butte's historical architecture and stained glass for many years and presently works as a librarian. Irene and her family have done extensive restoration on the historic Leonard Hotel in Butte. Irene is also involved in costuming for historical events and for theatrical productions. Would you please welcome Dick and Irene? They also have a book about the stained glass windows for $5 back here if you'd like to have one. They said they'd even sign autographs for you.
Thank you. If you really want it, we will be happy to sign anything, except for blank checks. Thanks for having us down from Butte. As the introduction and the talk description says, we're going to talk somewhat about the stained glass, but we're going to use the stained glass and the designs in the stained glass as our springboard for telling you stories about Butte history. That's our real purpose here. So we'll hopefully give you an outline of some of the ethnic history and the religious landscape of Butte, but that's just the starting point because the stories are pretty phenomenal. Our talk is based on the book that you do see in the back. The book was put together by the Butte CPR, the Butte Citizens for Preservation and Revitalization, and Paulette said that really well. It's really hard to say. So Butte CPR, which is a grassroots private organization in Butte. We call ourselves the Building Huggers. We preserve, protect, and defend the historic architecture of Butte. We put the book together last year, 2006, to accompany last year's stained glass tour. This has become an annual event down in Butte, and it was supported by the Montana Cultural Trust and by the Butte Silver Bow Urban Revitalization Agency. So we do appreciate their support very much. How many of you have been to Butte? Okay, good. I hope so. This quote from Mary McLean, which is Butte's youthful and controversial author from the early part of the 20th century, really to me says it all. And the bottom line, for mixture, for miscellany, variedness, and bohemianism, where is Butte's rival? That was true in 1902, it's true today. Butte is an eclectic, a diverse kind of a place. It was then and it still is. Some of the things that we're going to focus on, and we'll go kind of around the bend in different ways. We'll talk about class distinction, the cultural diversity, and the boom and bust that has led to the churches and the features and things that are illustrated in the stained glass. Okay, here's Butte, historical image, right? No, this is Google Earth, sorry. The Berkeley Pit over here, and let's see, where's the courthouse? The courthouse is right there. So we're looking all the way from Walkerville up at the top, Centerville. The Big Butte is right over here. The interstate is down here, right about here. So we're looking at central uptown Butte. And the churches that we're going to talk about are 3 out of what we call the church district. One up here in Centerville, one off on the west side, one that's way down here on Continental Drive, and all the rest of them are in this central zone right here, which we call the church district. In 1917, 46 churches were in Butte. About a third of them were right in that concentrated zone. So this is an enlargement that focuses on that area. There's the courthouse again, if you're familiar with Butte. Here's Montana Street, one of the main north-south streets in town. And the area we're going to focus on is this zone right in here. The solid yellow squares are churches that are still standing. The dashed outlines are places where there used to be churches. So there were a lot of churches within this concentrated zone. And on our stained glass tour this year, we did it as a guided walking tour, starting up here at the Methodist Church and proceeding down this way to these 2 Lutheran churches. And we'll take a look at most of these churches here. But we've got a wide range. This for example, was the Chinese mission. This one up here, it's no longer there, was the Swedish Methodist Episcopal Church. Lots of diversity. While we're looking at this, just one thing to point out, this one right here is the place where the Serbian Orthodox Church used to be. You'll see a picture of the old church. It's not there now, and we'll talk about the modern one. Okay, if we talk about, oh, I went too far. If we talk about class distinction, we're going to use the 2 Methodist churches in the north part of Butte to focus on that. We have a very massive Mountain View Methodist Church built in 1899, the second church on that spot. Many of the big churches in Butte are the second church that was built there, and that's an absolute reflection of the population explosion. In the very late 1890s and into the 1900s, Butte's population was taking off. It was going from about 3,000 in 1880 to over 30,000 in 1900. So it multiplied tenfold in 20 years. To accommodate all these people, the churches and every other institution needed to expand. So that's what was happening here. Mountain View, the massive church there, we see up here in the corner William Clark. Most of you are familiar with his picture. In Butte, he's most identified with the Episcopal Church. But the cornerstone of the church they tore down to build this one showed William Clark as the president of the Mountain View congregation when it started in 1876. It was the first non-Catholic congregation in Butte. Up the hill in Centerville, we have this pretty simple looking little frame church called Trinity Methodist Church. They're both built about the same time, the very late 1890s, but this one was called the Mine Owners Church, and this one was called the Miners Church. This is in Centerville, which is where miners lived. This is in the north edge of Butte, actually the north edge of the ritzy west side of Butte, where plenty of rich people lived. And when you go inside, the interior reflects that as well. This detailed stained glass over here is from Mountain View Church. We are not absolutely positive, but about 95% sure that this stained glass was made in Butte. Butte was the only city in Montana to have its own stained glass works. You'll hear people in Butte tell you that, yes, I have a Tiffany window, it was made in Butte. Well, no. Tiffany never had its own factory in Butte. There were many of the workers in Butte who were trained in the Tiffany factories back east. But a Tiffany window is a very special thing, and a lot of the Tiffany windows that people want to say they have, they aren't. They may have been made in the Tiffany style, they may have been made by people who were trained by Tiffany, but they're not Tiffany. The Trinity Church is really relatively simpler, but even here we have some special things. The glass up there in the top is what's called opalescent glass. That's a complicated and special type of glass. It takes multiple firings, complicated and actually toxic chemicals. We think that there's really only one large stained glass maker in the U.S. today that makes in great volume opalescent stained glass. These complicated, intricate designs that you see are pretty typical of these churches too. If you can tell in this image here, it looks like it's rippled. It is. It's actually got a very coarse texture, and that was one of their techniques for giving depth, making you feel like the stuff was deeper and had another dimension. We'll talk about some of the other techniques in a minute. So here we are, just to show you the locations. We're up in Centerville. Here's the edge of the Berkeley Pit. Main Street is right here. So the Mountain View Church is down here. Trinity Methodist Church is right there. This is Centerville. Here's Walkerville up here. Walkerville was mostly English, Cornish, Welsh settlers and miners. And down here, not very far further south, Dublin Gulch was obviously mostly Irish. Centerville was about half and half. Centerville had two of everything. It had two barbershops, it had two grocery stores, it had two everything, including churches, to serve those disparate communities, the Irish community and the English, Welsh, Cornish type community. As you probably know, the English and the Irish didn't exactly get along in the early part of the last century. Ireland was trying very hard to become completely independent, so this resulted in tensions in Butte as well. So here on the south side of Centerville, we had the Trinity Methodist Church, and on the north side of Centerville, we had the St. Lawrence Catholic Church. All of these folks pretty much worked in the mines. The Mountain Con mine, Butte's deepest, is located right here, so people who lived in Centerville could have walked to work. There is the Lexington mine right there. There's the Missoula shaft right here, and this leads to a story of the mining. The Lexington mine up here is in Walkerville. And Walkerville then and Walkerville today had its own identity separate from Butte. As you may know, Butte is really a combination city and county, Butte-Silver Bow. Walkerville's not part of that. Walkerville has its own mayor. It uses Butte City Services. It's a complicated relationship, but they have their own little identity, and it's really important to them. Well, back in the days of active mining, Walkerville had its own tax rules as well. So the company that was mining in the Lexington mine here chose to put a tunnel, and this yellow line is the outline of that tunnel. It goes past the Missoula shaft and reaches the surface down here south of Centerville, and that's where they took their ore out, because it was cheaper to take it out to the surface in Butte than it was in Walkerville. Always the entrepreneur. And I like this one. This sort of reflects our title, Through a Glass Brightly. This is looking through the broken windows of the hoist house in the Mountain Con mine down the hill at the Trinity Methodist Church. All of these windows here are from the Mountain View Church, again the mine owner's church, a very prestigious church. And incidentally, if you see this vignette anywhere and it's large, it's taller than me, it's really a large thing. Two of those were stolen from that church in the 1980s. So if you see that somewhere, call the cops, it's stolen. Down here in the corner we have Jacob Riis. How many of you know who Jacob Riis was? All right, you're going to learn something then. Jacob Riis was a Danish reformer, a socialist in a way, but he came to the United States to become he was really called one of the first muckrakers. He wrote newspaper articles, he took photographs that focused on the downtrodden, the poor conditions, especially in New York City. But he created this awareness, if you will, of what was going on in the slums of America in the early part of the 20th century. He came to Butte in 1906, and this photo is actually of him in 1906, and spoke in the Mountain View Methodist Church. He likely showed some of his pictures, not in a PowerPoint presentation, but this is one of his pictures from his famous book, How the Other Half Lives, which was the first time anybody had taken pictures of the poor people, the people that lived in slums of New York City especially. He worked up and down the East Coast, but mostly in New York City. By 1906, when he came to Butte, he had established a reputation. Teddy Roosevelt knew him and liked him and politely called him a muckraker. Muckraker had a good connotation in those days. It was, you have dug up some good stuff. We need to know this. So this all is connected with the class situation between the upper classes, the lower classes, the complicated classes, and Butte was full of this kind of thing. The Trinity Church, which again was called the Mine Owners Church, has some very ornate stained glass, and like I said, this opalescent stained glass as well. And you're going to want to know, why do we have this mansion up here in the corner? Well, M.J. Connell, who was a dry goods merchant in Butte, and this house is straight across the street from the Copper King Mansion if you go to Butte. It has copper shingles up there on its mansard roof. And it's actually one of the older houses in Butte, built in 1880. It's actually older than the Copper King Mansion. Mr. Connell gave the windows to the Trinity Church. So we didn't have total class separation. That's just a close-up of the roof line there. And now we've got another upper level sort of a person, Senator Lee Mantle, who was born in England, was in the first territorial legislature of Montana, and went on to become one of our first senators. Mr. Mantle gave the electric lights, which were built into this church in 1896. This was a very big deal. In 1896, for a funky little church like this to have electric lights from the start said a lot about the richness of Butte, even in the miners' church, not the mine owners' church. So this is the connection with these relatively wealthy people. They supported things a lot all across the board. Now Irene's going to talk about the Catholic community in Butte, starting with the St. Patrick's Church.
St. Patrick's Church was it's called the Mother Church of Butte, and especially of Butte's Catholic community. In the 1860s, I think 1866, it was the only church in Butte of any denomination. And then, as Butte's population began to boom in the late part of the 1800s, it was the pastor of St. Patrick's who started establishing other parishes because they simply couldn't be held in the St. Patrick's Church. The church building that you see here is basically, the original St. Patrick's Church was a little frame church. And this one was built in 1886, I believe. And the one that was built in 1886, this is still the framework of it. As early in the 1900s, 2 side wings were added to it, and then in a big renovation in the 1940s, they changed the style of the windows. They added new windows, they added new brass front doors, but the essential structure is still there of the church that was built in the 1880s. If you can see the difference between the church that we just looked at in the last frame, over here on the left-hand side of the frame, which is how St. Patrick's Church looks today, and then to this view of St. Patrick's Church in 1918, you can see what's happened to the windows. None of the original windows from St. Patrick's Church were kept after this renovation in the early 1940s, except one. The window that depicted St. Patrick was kept. It was put in a little separate frame and put in the back choir loft in the church. So if you're ever in St. Patrick's, you can go up the choir loft stairs and see the original window of St. Patrick that's been kept. What happened to the other ones, I don't know. But you can see that this renovation in the 1940s was really dramatic. They changed the way the porch was, the way the stairs led up to it. It was, They wanted to look as new and modern as any church in Butte, and they had a very dynamic pastor at that time. His name was Monsignor Michael English. He was the pastor for over 25 years. Okay, from St. Patrick's, the parishes were established starting in 1884, St. Lawrence. Oh, that's St. Patrick's in 1884. Next should come St. Lawrence, 1897. 1901, that's the Sacred Heart Church, which was out on East Park Street and which is totally gone now because of the Berkeley pit. 1902 came St. Mary Church and St. Joseph Church. 1906, Immaculate Conception Church. 1908, Holy Savior Church, which was in a community that was also taken away by the pit. 1916, 1908 was, 1916, St. Helena's Church was in Meaderville, the little Italian community. All those churches on that Berkeley pit area are gone. And in 1917, both St. John's and St. Anne's churches were established. So from 1922, out in Browns Gulch, a little St. Patrick's Church. So in this, stop it, Dick. 1978, there we have Holy Spirit, which is our newest parish. That's all, finally. Those Catholics. So from the establishment of St. Patrick's Parish in 1884, the church was there before that, but it was a mission parish whose headquarters were in Deer Lodge. And so it wasn't a parish of its own until 1884. But look at the huge boom in that 20-year period from one single church to over 10 churches. And it's interesting to note that the dates you see on here are the dates that those parishes were established, not necessarily when the churches were built. Because for the Catholic population of Butte, the most important thing was the education of their children. Most of these parishes, when they were established, the first thing they did was build a school for their children to go, and they held worship services in the basement of the school for a few years till they built the church. In the case of the Immaculate Conception Parish, it was over 30 years from the time the school was built and the parish was established till they got the church building actually built. This is Immaculate Conception Church, which is the one that you can see at the foot of the Big M. So it's the money was raised for the construction of Immaculate Conception Church during the years of the Great Depression. And it's kind of phenomenal that this church, that fundraising took place in a really depressed economy. It had to do with, again, just a gung-ho pastor of that parish that was kind of appointed specially because he could get things done, he could get the people fired up to donate money. I love the windows in the Immaculate Conception Church. They're not like any others you will see in Butte. They have all kinds of historic motifs incorporated into them. They were built, the other churches you'll see, most of those windows were done at the turn of the century. Because Buttes were done in the late 1930s, this particular window is called the Montana window. The saint that's portrayed in it is Blessed Kateri Tekakwitha. She hadn't even achieved sainthood at that time. You see I've got this thing. You can see I'm not very technologically savvy. That little emblem there is the emblem of the Diocese of Helena with the year that it was established, 1884. There's the Great Seal of the state of Montana. And here is the first mission church that was built in Montana, St. Mary's Mission in Stevensville. And all those are incorporated into the stained glass of this window. This window in the center is called the Tree of Life window, and the vines coming up on the side, each one of them has a different insignia in it that represents different classes of sainthood, and they come from the root, which is Christ, and grow up and around. This window faces the east. It's right above the main doors of the church. And this glass in the center was originally clear glass block. And it was supposed to be surrounded by this deep blue background and the clear shining light of Christ coming through it. What happened was that when the priest was saying morning mass and had to turn and face the congregation, he was pretty well blinded by the light coming through that window. So they replaced it with this colored glass, which is done in a totally different style. This Norman slab glass, which the bulk of the windows are made up, is done in a very special way. It's actually glass that is blown, not glass that's rolled in a sheet. And so they created a metal box that was about this size, and then they blew the molten glass into that box frame, and then when it cooled, they split the box apart and cut the four sides and the bottom off this blown glass box. And so you have glass that is thicker in the center and then thinner. It was blown out to the sides. And I think you can see in the colors that the color is more intense in the center of the blocks and lighter towards the outside. And that technique is called Norman slab glass. These were very, very expensive windows to produce. The cross in the center is done with a technique that has a French name, dalle de verre glass, which basically means paving stones of glass. And these are thick sections of glass. They're kind of chipped at the edges to create a faceting, and then they're set in a bed of mortar or an epoxy mix of some kind. So it's a totally different technique, and if you can walk up into the back choir loft, if you're ever in this church, you can get up close to see it and see the detail in it. Some of the other emblems you see in this window, this is the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the BVMs we called them, who were the nuns who taught in the school. This is the boys' window. They had a girls' window and a boys' window. So this is St. Ignatius Loyola, who was the patron saint of boys. There's the emblem of the Boy Scouts. CYO was the athletic organization, Catholic youth organization, that handled all the basketball, volleyball, football games for all the Catholic schools in the area. On the lower level, the side aisle walkways in Immaculate Conception, each window features a little central shield that represents either one of the bishops of Montana or one of the popes from the time that the parish was established until the time that the church was built. And so the Pope's insignias start with Pope Leo XIII, who was Pope when the parish was established, and then there's all the popes that were gone through until 1939-40 when the church was being built. And then this is one of the bishop's insignias. I think this is Bishop Carroll's insignia, or Bishop Brondell, one of the early bishops of the Catholic Diocese of Helena. This is St. Joseph's Church. The original St. Joseph's, this one was built in 1911. The parish was established in 1902, St. Mary's and St. Joseph's in the same year. It was originally a smaller frame church. They had a fire that destroyed their church in February of 1911. And in 1 year's time, because they celebrated Mass here on Christmas Day in 1911, so from February to Christmas Day, this church was built to replace their church that burned. The architect who designed the cathedral in Helena had just finished his cathedral work. The bishop of the diocese was very, very impressed with him. So that same architect designed St. Joseph's in a very different style than the cathedral, which is very Gothic. And there's a picture of St. Joseph's as it looks today. The Munich studio out of Chicago, Illinois, Munich studio were stained glass workers who were trained in Germany, in Munich, and then emigrated to the United States. And so the glass work they did here, they wanted their German stained glass heritage to be known. Their works were called the Munich Studio. And this is in this church is one of the best examples of the kind of work that they did. This is called a mat and trace technique, where they laid a stencil design over the glass, and then that design was etched and fired into the glass, so you have these very intricate patterns in the background glass. These two windows, both in St. Joseph's, depict Our Lady of Victory. Or the original St. Joseph's Church that was destroyed in the fire, one of the very few things that was salvaged from the fire was a statue of Our Lady of Victory. So she held a pretty special place in these people's hearts because of her surviving the fire, seemed symbolic to them. So she shows up, and you know that it's Our Lady of Victory because she's wearing a crown on her head and holding the infant Jesus. The Ancient Order of Hibernians, the Irish Catholics, have a big place in a lot of the churches. So they donated the funds for one of these huge rose windows in St. Joseph's. Each of these emblems represents Mary in some regard. The gate into a hidden garden, the well, the cedar of Lebanon. So all these symbols somehow relate to Mary. And when this church was built was when in the Catholic Church devotion to Mary was very, very strong because of her appearances at Fatima and Lourdes. And so that was why in this context, that's why the Immaculate Conception Church was named the Immaculate Conception, because in one of her apparitions, when they asked, "Who are you?" she said, "I am the Immaculate Conception." So a lot of the symbolism in these windows reflects that time and that veneration of Mary. Okay, Dick's turn again. I'm the Catholic expert, can you tell?
And I'm not. Okay, we're turning to the Baptist Church because the windows here tell us something about the battles between the two most foremost stained glass makers in the United States. Many of you have probably heard of Louis Comfort Tiffany. The Tiffany Studios and the whole Tiffany family was really, essentially, they gave their name to the Art Nouveau movement in the United States. We wouldn't be the same in the United States without Tiffany's stained glass. You probably have not heard of John Lafarge. John Lafarge patented a method of creating this opalescent glass, which is expressed really nicely in these vignettes in the First Baptist Church in Butte. The glass around it is regular stained glass, and then this is this swirly pattern, this opalescent stuff that's very difficult to make. Lafarge, in about, I think it's February of 1889, patented a technique for creating this. Well, Tiffany didn't exactly like this, and he patented a very slightly different technique about November in 1889. The bottom line of it was they really couldn't, either of them couldn't do what they had to do without the other's approach to making the glass. So they apparently tried. There's some evidence that says that they tried to have a rapprochement, that they tried to form a joint venture. That definitely did not work, and they were on the outs for the rest of their lives. And this fight, the war of the stained glass kings, if you will, really permeated the stained glass business and the art business in the U.S. in the latter part of the 19th century. They, of course, were not the only ones that did their thing. There were many companies. They were just the most prestigious. The Ford Brothers Studio, which has signed this window here in the First Baptist Church, they're in Minneapolis. And in the churches, the 10 churches that we described in our booklet, we have stained glass that we know came from Minneapolis, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, and almost certainly Butte. So that's what we know. It came from all over the place. In those early days, with the population exploding, the churches had money. This big window, and the size of this it's way big. I mean, it's half again as tall as this room. in a great big circle. The Ford brothers were very prestigious for being a non-New York firm. They were in Minneapolis, and in 1904, they had just commissioned the stained glass dome of the Capitol building of the state of Minnesota. So this is just 2 years later, 1907, that they are in Butte creating this huge big window. The stained glass dome of the Minnesota state capitol costs $5 a square foot. And I don't know how many square feet this is, but it's a lot, and you have to add, travel from Minneapolis to Butte in 1907 as well. So not a cheap window at all. The people who were making these things, they had money, they wanted to show it off, they wanted to let the prestige come through. So here's an outside view of the First Baptist Church, and you remember the map with the church zone, the rectangle on it. This is also here to show you a view of how close together things were. That's the Presbyterian Church right there. It's just half a block away. There used to be the Montana Hotel used to stand in between them. It burned in 1988. But just a couple blocks away, or half a block away, the Methodist Church is 1 block up that way. Catty-cornered from the church here is the Episcopal Church that we'll see in a minute. So if we look at the First Presbyterian Church, this is a church designed by Henry Patterson, who is probably Butte's most prestigious homegrown architect. He designed everything from homes to churches, public buildings, all kinds of things. There's about 30 buildings in Butte that are designed by Henry Patterson. This dates to 1896. It hasn't been used as a church in a long time. And if you've been to Butte lately, you have seen the new sign out here, the Covalite Theater. They put on repertory performances in the summer. And now Irene, though, is going to tell you something about the stained glass, because as you look at it, you see that it isn't stained glass.
One of the sad things about Butte's buildings is groups that want to save them and move in with all kinds of enthusiasm and then fail. So one of the groups was Butte's Jazz Society, which purchased this building, got grant money to do a lot of restoration on it. They had the windows taken out, and they were sent to Father Dan Hillen in Helena, who was kind of this stained glass expert for the state of Montana, to be restored and to be put back in. In the meanwhile, the person who was doing all the fundraising for the Jazz Society turned out to have a criminal background, and they ended up folding. The building went back to the grant, the entity that had given him the grant and the loan money. And the stained glass windows left in pieces in Father Dan Hillen's studio, and he died. So thankfully, his family realized the importance of the glass to the church. They gave the glass back to the new owners of the building, the Covalite Theater people, and they are right now stored in those people's garage with the intent that they will get those windows restored and put back in this beautiful church. But at least they're not lost forever.
As happens too often in Butte. So just catty-corner from the Episcopal Church, the Covalite Theater, is the St. John's Episcopal Church. This is among the oldest standing churches in uptown Butte, 1881. It's made out of nice Butte granite, and it has some spectacular windows in it. This close-up is a really fine example of that trace and matte technique that Irene was talking about, where basically stuff has to be brushed on and then scraped off in order to create the detail of the pattern, and it has to be fired twice. You fire the glass itself, then you fire it again for the paint. So it's a complicated technique. The Episcopal Church is like many of the Catholic Church in that many of the figures are human and very religious. The Methodist churches, the Baptist Church, most of the imagery that you see is floral or abstract sorts of decorations. So this is pretty close to the Catholics in terms of the style of the windows. These are pretty cool because they have figures in them that are, again, like the Immaculate Conception Church, stories of history, whether they be about Montana or, in this case, about an individual. Here we've got a battleship, not something you really expect to see in stained glass. A battleship and a big fish. Well, this particular window, complete with the patriotic symbols here, was dedicated by someone who paid for it to their son, who was killed in not quite World War I. It was in November of 1941. He was killed in some kind of an action where the ship sank. So it's in his memory, but it tells that story of patriotism as we ramped up into World War II. Did I say one? World War II is what I meant. As a geologist, this is one of my favorite windows because, again, you don't expect to see a guy with a pick and shovel and a carbide lamp and a pick and shovel in the corner in stained glass. But in Butte, you do. This is dedicated to Francis Thompson, who not only was heavily involved in this church, he was also the president of the Montana School of Mines for many years, the school that became Montana Tech. So these kind of figures in stained glass really are telling the story of Butte through the individuals as well as the individual churches. This window itself has a lot of story to it. Again, we see William Clark. This is the church that became William Clark's preeminent church. He just lived 2 blocks up the hill in the Copper King Mansion. And this window, which is another one of these huge ones, is actually dedicated by his son to his son's wife, who had died in 1903, his first wife. The son went on to be the founder of the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra, and Mr. Clark himself, of course, formed the heart of the Corcoran collection in Washington, D.C., the art gallery there, and he did lots of things. This church has another window, this one. This window, which is behind their altar, is perhaps not quite as imposing as that other one we just saw in the previous slide, but its history is pretty interesting. Mr. Clark sponsored it. It's dedicated to one of his twin daughters. He had twin daughters, Jessie and Catherine. Jessie died at age 3, and this window is dedicated to her. Pompeo Bertini, who came over from Milan, executed this window. Pompeo Bertini was one of Europe's foremost stained glass experts. He designed and executed the stained glass in the Cathedral of Milan, Italy. So he's a big deal. In 1918, the interior of this church was gutted by fire, a continual story in Butte. Fire all the time, forever, it seems. And this window was saved. Nothing happened to it for quite a while because just after 1918, depression hit Butte. You know why? Because World War I ended, and there was no more demand for copper shell casings. So Butte had depression way before the 1929 crash and that depression. So this hung around for a while until Clark's son, again, the brother of the twin sister who had died at age 3, and the surviving twin, Catherine, shipped this thing off to New York for a year where it was refurbished. Then it comes back to Butte and is reinstalled. So the history of that window alone really tells you a lot about what was going on, at least with the rich folks. That little map is going to show you what I already said, how far Mr. Clark had to go. Here's the Copper King Mansion, and here's the Episcopal Church. So he didn't have very far to trot down to church. Just around the corner from the last one, the Episcopal Church, we come to the synagogue, the Congregation B'nai Israel Synagogue, which is the oldest surviving synagogue in Montana. It's not the first one built, it's the second one. The first one was built in Helena, but it's no longer present. And it's one of the few in the entire country that is still in use as a synagogue that has this Moorish-style architecture. There are many surviving synagogues that have that style of architecture, but most of them are being reused for something else. For example, I was in Savannah, Georgia, where their synagogue, which has this style, is being used as a student union for a college. So one of the few that's still in use. It just celebrated its centennial a few years ago. And the connection to the community in here is in business, actually, mostly. This big window, which is this round window right here, is dedicated to Elias and Mina Oppenheimer. The Oppenheimer family, together with the Simons family, with which they were very complicatedly married, founded and ran the Simons Department Store, which for decades was one of the largest department stores in Montana and in Butte. It competed well with Hennessy's, the other really large department store in Butte. The building, which is the third store, is now called the Phoenix Building. It's on Park Street in Butte. And that one was built in 1906 to replace one that burned down in the Great Fire of 1905. Oh, there it is. I forgot that we had that picture. That's the present Phoenix Building, which was the 1906 building of the Simons Department Store. This building also had the first escalator installed in the state of Montana. Francis Simons, who is dedicated in the window on the other side of the synagogue, creates a little bit of a mystery for us. We actually did quite a lot of research to try to figure this out. It says, in loving memory of Mrs. Frances A. Simons. Well, the only Frances A. Simons that we could find in any records was a little girl who died at age 5 days old in 1899. So obviously it wasn't a Mrs. But so that remains a little bit of a mystery. We have talked to a lot of people and inquired about it. We haven't figured it out. So if anybody knows about Mrs. Frances A. Simons, please let us know. This picture is taken on the steps of the synagogue, and again, the point of it is to show you the proximity of all these churches. We're looking down the block at the St. Paul's Methodist Episcopal Church. In those days, Methodist Episcopal apparently was very closely connected. So, in fact, the Mountain View Church was called the ME Church, Methodist Episcopal, for a while. Now it's just Methodist. We're going to go down to that church. And these windows, which are in bad shape, are very, very similar to those in the Mountain View Methodist Church, which was built the same year, 1899. This interesting brick pattern sort of lends a niceness to the appearance here. This church hasn't been a church at least since 1918. It's listed in the city directory as a church in 1917, but by 1918, it begins to have a huge role in Butte's history. What happened there in 1918 is that the Industrial Workers of the World, the Wobblies, the IWW, was printing the Butte Strike Bulletin in the basement of this church. It wasn't a church, it's referred to in the paper as, in fact, you can see it right there, Larry Dugan's church. And Irene lives in Larry Dugan's house. Larry Dugan went on to become the mayor of Butte. I think he was the sheriff. He is most famous for owning the mortuary that gives the name to the big rocks that might fall on you in the mine. The miners called them Dugans, because if it fell on you, you're going to Dugan's mortuary. Anyway, 1918, September, as a result of the complicated, super patriotic activities of the Council of Defense in Montana, they made a ruling that basically stifled the free press. They said that no weekly newspaper can become a daily newspaper. Well, this paper was a weekly that was going to become a daily. The Butte Strike Bulletin, and they were very, very anti-company. They were promoting strikes. They were promoting socialism. And it was a radical kind of socialism too. They were right on the edge of wanting to overthrow the entire capitalist system. So in September of 1918, a raid was brought on this church. They went in there and they took the typeset stuff. So much for freedom of the press again. They took it away. They arrested 40 folks in there, and quite a few more over in the Finlander Hall. The interesting historical sidelight is that the raid was led by the Butte City Police, a bunch of armed goons from the Anaconda Company, and the regular Army infantry that was stationed in Butte to keep down this labor problem, led by Major Omar Bradley. Now, a lot of you are old enough to know who General Omar Bradley was. He became basically Eisenhower's second in command in the European theater of World War II. He got his start, literally, in Butte as a captain in 1918. He came to Butte in January, temperatures 40 below zero. He brought his wife a couple months later. She had a stillborn child. He didn't have a good time in Butte. And he didn't want to be here. He wanted to go to France. He wanted to be fighting in World War I. Well, literally, this was the September 14th, which reports the Friday the 13th raid. The following Monday, we've got this picture in the paper. I guess it's not quite the following Monday, but the very next week, that's Omar right there. He gets his marching orders. He's leaving. He's going to be mustered off to the European action. Well, if you're familiar with the history of World War I, you know, September 18th, it's only 2 more months and the war is going to be over. And something else happened in the 1 month in between, in October of 1918, which we're going to talk about based on the Lutheran Church. So don't forget that. We're going to come back to Omar, all right? This is the St. Mark's Lutheran Church, like the Baptist Church and several others. It was built in one of the really big booms in 1906, 07, 08. The cornerstone there is in German. You're better than me.
I get to
Yes.
say, I get to say the German words too. I know the Catholics and I know how to pronounce in German. Deutsche Evangelical Lutheran St. Markus Kirche. So, and the fact that it was written in German was because those people in that congregation, that was the language that they spoke. There was another Lutheran church right across the street, but it was the Swedish Lutherans. They each built their own. That's part of the reason there were so many churches in Butte.
And they did their services in German until 1918, when the German language was banned. Initially in Montana, and then as the United States modeled its National Sedition Act after the very, very onerous Montana Sedition Act, it was banned everywhere. People literally were arrested in Montana for saying the word sauerkraut. Really. None of this bit about the freedom fries and all that we had, that was kind of a joke. People were arrested and put in jail for saying sauerkraut in Montana. It was a big deal. In the windows here, we've got some spectacular normal glass and opalescent glass. This one up here, which you need to see in person, it's actually, it's hard to tell. It's either painted on both sides or else it's 2 panes of glass. And this technique was specifically used, again, to give dimension, to give the feeling of thickness and depth. For my money, I would recommend very much, but you go to all these places if you can, but the opalescence that's in the background of these windows is just the best that you can ever want to see. It's really spectacular. So, back to Omar Bradley, trying to get to Europe, right? No, he didn't make it because of the influenza epidemic. It hit Montana and Butte in October of 1918, so just a couple weeks after thinks he's on his way, and it was a huge impact on Butte. The close quarters of the mines, the people jam-packed together up on the hill. It was just a breeding ground for influenza. This window in the St. Mark's Church is dedicated to Franz Benz, who died at age 23 of the influenza epidemic in 1918. This newspaper article from the middle of October, so this is just a month after that photo with Omar Bradley, not a photo, that sketch of Omar Bradley. The 1st of October, there had not been a single case of influenza reported in Butte, not one on the 1st of October. 3 weeks into it, 27 deaths, 570 cases. By the end of October, this was up to 1,000 cases and over 500 deaths, just in the month of October. Essentially, by the end of December, it was over. Butte had suffered probably at least a third of all of the cases and the fatalities in the state of Montana. It was about 1,200 that died in Butte. That's more than 1% of the population. So it was a big deal. And the number of cases was about 36,000. in the whole state of Montana, about 12,000 in Butte. So 10% of the population was sick. This photo down here shows the two churches, the two Lutheran churches that Irene mentioned. This is the German one, this is the Swedish one on this side. It's built in 1916, so it's a little bit later, and it's now the Butte Unity Center. Oh, there's that. And in connection with the influenza epidemic, again, a spectacular stained glass window. Who knows who that is? That's Huey Pak. Huey Pak is probably Butte's most famous Chinese resident. In the influenza epidemic, he was an herbal doctor. He was a Chinese doctor. During the influenza epidemic, he cured, she got better anyway, the daughter of one of the state senators. So he got famous, and everybody's coming to him. So the influenza epidemic really made his reputation. He made a lot of money. He died in 1925. And the Chinese, one of their heritage wishes is that they should have their bones shipped back to China to be buried. And that was his intent. He had enough money. The problem was his children squandered it instantly. And he lay in a glass coffin in a funeral home until I think 1955. 25 years, a very long time, when he was finally interred in an unmarked grave in one of Butte's cemeteries. So Huey Pak, a famous Chinese Butte resident. And we're getting close to the end, but you remember on the slide with all of the squares on it that showed you where the churches are and were, and I said, remember the one down here at the bottom? This is the original Serbian church, the Holy Trinity Serbian Orthodox Church. Built in 1904, it was the second Serbian Orthodox church in North America. The first one had been built in the Mother Lode district, another mining area of California. So this is the second one in North America. The Serbian community, like all of the ethnic groups, was exploding in those early 1900s. At some point, there were probably at least 4,000 Serbs in Butte. You can see the large size of the congregation, and you know there's a lot more that didn't go to church. Again, interestingly, in this illustration, that church right back there behind it, that's the Lutheran church, the St. Mark's Lutheran Church. So we're just a couple blocks down the way from it. You can sort of see in these images, again, these big onion domes on top. There's a problem, though. Here's the mine map, the underground mine map. You can't see all of the fine little things. I encourage you to get a hold of the map that shows the 10,000 miles of tunnels underneath Butte. What I'm going to show you is where the Serbian church was. These are mostly shallow tunnels coming out of the Emma mine. And we don't have a lot of subsidence in Butte, but we have had some. And the Serbian church down here at Porphyry and Idaho near the Emma mine did suffer some from subsidence. Its bigger problem came from the fact that in 1959, the largest earthquake ever recorded in the northern Rocky Mountains occurred down here at Hegman Lake, just west of West Yellowstone. And there was some damage in Butte, and some of that damage was to that church. So the bottom line was they had to abandon that church, and they built a new one. And it's out on Continental Drive in Butte. It was dedicated in 1964. Most of these frescoes that you see here, and they are spectacular in the Byzantine style, date from just the last few years as they were celebrating the centennial of their congregation. Not sure if you can read that, but that's the Lucas stained glass company in San Francisco. So that's yet another source for stained glass in Butte. So this is a 1964 church and a 1964 stained glass and about a 2005 set of frescoes. It's very well worth looking at if you like that kind of thing. And so with that, we thank you for your attention, and you'll see a whole lot of churches appear here, some that we have not talked about, but we very much appreciate your attention. We'd be happy to answer questions. Yes.
In that reference to the Mrs. Simons, or whatever it was, is it possible that they just had a spelling error and meant miss to refer to the child?
Well, they didn't have Ms. back in those days, but so it would have had to have been MISS.
That's what I meant.
It's not impossible. I mean, we found Frances A. Simons and her parents, the whole works, and there weren't any other Frances A. Simons in this. We found a whole bunch of Simons. So I suppose it's possible, but you would think they'd be careful in terms of spelling and stained glass, but it's possible. Yes?
You said you did the tours in Butte. What time of the year? Are they over the whole summer, or?
The stained glass tours we have done, we've only done one a year, and it has typically been in April in recent years. Yes?
What time period was it when Oxford disappeared into the pit?
The Berkeley pit started up
1955.
basically, yeah, in the 1950s. And I'm old enough to remember when we drove to those neighborhoods, when we went to Meaderville to see their spectacular Christmas displays they put up. And so I lived through the disappearance of those neighborhoods. Some of my friends from high school, you know, their whole neighborhood and all their family and friends had to go find someplace else to live as the company bought up all the homes in their area. The Holy Savior Church, which wasn't part of this, which was located in the community of McQueen, beautiful brick church structure, and there's pictures of the mine waste rubble just being poured on it, and it half buried with its little spire sticking up. It's part of growing up in Butte.
The other church that was out there, it was on Irene's map that was in the pit, St. Helena's Church in Meaderville, was actually saved. It's at the World Museum of Mining. They literally trucked it through the streets of Butte out to the mining museum.
It was a smaller frame church. It was able to be picked up and moved, which the big solid brick ones couldn't be. So yeah, it was saved, and it is, you can still go inside it.
Yeah, the church in
Yeah.
Browns Gulch is at the World Museum of Mining. That's another St. Patrick's church. It takes a lot.